Hello, my name is Houston, and this is Media Mood Board. Yes, welcome to Media Mood Board, the show about hyper-specific entertainment lists. My name is Houston, and this week we're just talking about all the stuff that I watched or played or read during October. First, let's get into books. So this month I have one book that I read, one book that I listened to on audiobook, and then several novellas that I read as part of my horror pre-1900s. I've only got one left from that group. Just before we get into it, I'm not going to spoil anything heavy about these books. I'm going to go over major stuff that you might see on the back of the book or whatever, but if for you, spoilers means hearing any plot points at all, then I would just scrub through to make sure you keep yourself safe. So we'll start at the top. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is the book that I read this month. This was recommended to me by Rosie, who loved it so much and said, you have to read it, and I finally did. I wrote a personal synopsis for each one of these books, so when I'm looking down, that's me reading that. A group of eccentric Ivy League students who idolize Greek philosophers and share a morbid longing for the picturesque end up murdering one of their own. It's a classic of the dark academia genre, which is basically the smell of a dusty library with old books full of old knowledge. Normally kind of intelligentsia, academia, Ivy League, preppy. This romanticizing of someone sitting by a study reading a library book and listening to Bach. This kind of scratches some of the same itch that some of the stuff that Lovecraft does, like forbidden knowledge or knowledge hidden in books, but in elegant velvet. So this book is really fun. It starts off revealing to you in the first pages that a murder has occurred. And then we kind of jump back in time and try and figure out how we got there. We're kind of following the story through this kind of middle-class Californian who moves to this Ivy League school and then kind of falls in with this group of hyper-clicky Greek students who kind of think that they're thinking on a different plane as everybody else because they're studying these ancient philosophers and they're trying to figure out how did they think? They knew something that we didn't. It kind of deals with obsession and hyperfixation on things and the kind of out of touchness you get when you get too deep into something or are too isolated from other people. I loved this book. It's literary fiction that's having this really fun time with genre. The first half of the book is more of a crime thriller. The second half of the book is kind of more of a psychological thriller. And some criticisms are that they don't like the second half as much, the psychological. It's just really different than the first half. My main criticism is I wish that they were even more disparate. I think it's a really fun book and I really do love it. But if that second half went even wilder, oh man, A++++. So moving on to the audiobook that I listened to this month, it's The Judgement of Paris. This is a non-fiction account of the Paris art scene during the birth of the Impressionist art movement following the artist Ernest Masonier and Edward Manet. I started listening to this because there was going to be a Manet Degas retrospective type thing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I've never really researched before going to an art exhibit before, so I told myself, okay, I'm going to learn a little bit about this so I can go see it and have the most enriched time that I can have. So I ended up reading the material they had on the Met website, and then that piqued my interest, and I watched a couple of YouTube essays and YouTube videos and streamed some college lectures on them. And when things started repeating themselves, I said, hey, I should just read a full book on this just to get the full picture, because I got hungry for more information. So that led me to this. I had a lot of fun with this book. I listened to it on audiobook because it's something I could put on when doing chores or cooking or taking a walk or on the train or something like that. It was enough information that I got to know the characters and the world in a really interesting way. There definitely were parts that dragged, but it's a nonfiction book, so that's just par for the course. And because it was an audiobook, all I really had to do was just like sit through it, and if I missed a part that I didn't care about, then that's just how it is. I learned a lot from it. I gained some perspective on the history of that area, which I didn't really know. It feels more tactile to me now. I know a little bit more of the players. I definitely learned about people that I didn't know before, and I loved seeing their relationships with each other and how they were interpreting what they were seeing around them. Honestly, one of the most interesting things about this to me is how it relates to our current day. At the time that this book is talking about, artists were kind of dealing with the recent invention of the photograph, and how that emerging technology, which can one for one copy the real world, how does that affect the kind of work that you put out into the world? What is our relationship with technology? Seeing people grapple with this problem and try to come to conclusions and see what things they experimented with apply to the modern day to me, because we are also dealing with this change in technology and how that affects what we put out into the world. I'm creating a YouTube video right now. There's thousands of people creating content to be put online in response to the internet. If you create anything for other people to see, at a certain point you think to yourself, why am I making this? Or what can I do that makes this meaningful? So it's interesting to see an earlier group of people tackle those problems and see how they approached it. Okay, so on to the Gothic books that I ended up getting through in October. We'll start with the Castle of Otranto, which I think I know how to pronounce now. A family scrambles to regain control when a full moon brings about a family curse on the night of a wedding. Out of all the books that I read for my pre-1900s horror, this one took me the longest, even though it's not the longest page count-wise. That's because the grammar of it feels very old. Just as an example, instead of breaking things off into paragraphs, all the dialogue is within blocks of paragraphs. Your brain just has to think a little bit differently. The thing that surprised me the most about this book is how funny it is. If you like the TV show The Great, you'll really like this book. They have the exact same sense of humor. At a certain point, I just saw Elle Fanning and Nicholas Hoult as some of the characters in this, was reading their voices in it, and just was having a great time. Not spooky, but really funny. Next, I read the short story The Queen of Spades, which I read in this Pushkin collected works. An army officer becomes obsessed with locating an elderly countess when hearing a rumor that she earned her fortune after she was taught a supernatural technique to cheat at cards. Going into this, I was like, oh, this sounds like that Roald Dahl thing that just came out. And there's no way he didn't take inspiration from this. Really fun, twisty-turny short story. Feels very classic. I really enjoyed reading this. It's fun. It's quick. It feels very modern. One thing that really shocked me, especially after reading this right after Otranto, was how modern this felt. This just felt like it was written yesterday, where the other one felt like it was written in the 1700s. The structure of it's really interesting too. There's two main characters and we jump between their perspectives and then their lives eventually intertwine. It's just fun. And that's a lot to do in a short story, but it's really well handled and it's super thrilling and entertaining. The Fall of the House Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. A man visits the home of a childhood friend, only to find the majority of the family dead, and the remaining members blaming their crumbling lives on the manor where they live. I was interested to, as an adult, revisit Edgar Allan Poe. And personally, for me, the language enjoyed itself a little bit too much for me to get too into the story. I thought the plot points were interesting, and there were some interesting, cool, weird things that happened. But as far as the communication of it, I didn't really enjoy it that much. I'm sorry. But I'm glad I read it. Also, I know there's like a Netflix series about this out right now, but there's no way it's like, how true of an adaptation is it to this? Is this like a period? I mean, I can easily Google this, so whatever. Next up, I read Carmilla, which may be my favorite from the ones that I've read for this pre-1900s horror. Living in their country estate, a teen girl believes she has found the cure for her loneliness when her father offers to take in an injured girl. But soon, they begin to suspect their guest might be a vampire. It's a really enjoyable read. It's not difficult at all. Our main character starts developing feelings for this new guest who's come in the house. And then the guest gets like almost like a little too obsessed. And it's kind of like, oh, okay, like you're coming on a little strong. Like, what's going on? And then you're like, can we trust this person? And then there's some other more fantasy elements that come into play later. But I think what really pushed this over the edge to me into probably my favorite of the bunch was in my specific version, there was a foreword by the editor, which detailed some more recent discoveries about the origins of this book. So to background this a little bit, there's a moral tale. And part of the moral is that like kind of lesbianism is like you can't trust it type of thing. So the lesbian aspect of it had always been a part of the story. But the interesting thing is that the dialogue from this and the relationship is based on two actual lovers from that time period. They found the letters in this author's home. They're not his letters. They're two other people. He took snippets from their relationship, co-opted it, and then removed parts of it to suit the narrative. I won't spoil anything, but I'll just say that the dialogue that he's stealing these literal conversations from does not end with the finality that the book does. I would encourage you to seek out this version, edited by Carmen Maria Machado. There's probably other versions that have this too, but it's really interesting to see some of the examples that she gives. It's like, okay, here's how he twisted the story to make it suit the morals that he wanted versus the reality of what this relationship that it is based off of is. And the final book that I read this month, The Yellow Wallpaper. I never heard of it before. Multiple people that I talked to, including Rosie, had read this in school. So my curriculum failed me. It's a diary of a woman with depression who loses grip on reality after she's forced by her doctor husband to stay totally sedentary. Short, quick, I think it's like 40 pages. Ooh, this one was the spookiest one. There's a short comic by Junji Ito called the something of Egnamara Fault or Egnamara Fault. I'm pronouncing probably all the parts of that wrong. But it reminded me a lot of that. It's a story of this person who is not sick, in their right head, and because of their situation, they slowly start to lose grip with things and end up mutating and deforming themselves because of it. You know, it was the scenes in it were harrowing, and where it ends up, you're kind of like, oh God, oh my God. I just thought it was really well paced and well written and spooky. It was the only one that kind of spooked me a little bit of all the ones that I read. Okay, let's talk about movies. I went to the New York Film Fest this month and vlogged about it, and I've talked about it too much, so I'll try to keep really concise on those. But I saw other movies on top of it. It was October after all. Some spooky stuff was going on. I watched a lot of pre-code things, which I really enjoyed. But let's just get into it. The Ratcatcher. This was part of the Roald Dahl series by Wes Anderson. An out-of-town rat catcher called in on an emergency explains his process to the locals. The main thing this made me want is just a horror movie from Wes Anderson. There are really some cool shots in this, and it just plays more on his kind of the diorama-y niche of his Roald Dahl series. But overall, it didn't really hold my interest. There wasn't enough going on to justify this being made to me. I watched a double feature of Theater Camp and Waiting for Guffman. Theater Camp is when the director of a scrappy, tight-knit theater camp gets a concussion. Her meathead son takes her place, much to the terror of the existing staff. And then Waiting for Guffman is an eccentric playwright and his amateur cast puts on a community performance celebrating the 150th anniversary of the town they call home, Blaine, Missouri. Theater Camp is new. Waiting for Guffman is old. Waiting for Guffman's from the same creator of like Best in Show, This is Spinal Tap, A Mighty Wind, etc. And is mostly improvised. The look of Theater Camp is really good, like the tone of it. They're both faux documentaries about an amateur theater production. Theater Camp was a little too interested in following a typical kind of like structure as far as, okay, we need to have this here, we need to have the conflict, they need to argue, they need to get back together, and then they need to finish the thing. And I understand that's kind of the point because they're like parodying it a little bit, but it was really hindered by that to me and lost the fun. Waiting for Guffman was not interested in that structure at all. It followed the fun in every aspect. Incredible performances. It was fun seeing these actors follow their improvisational impulses. Where Theater Camp felt manufactured, Waiting for Guffman felt genuine, even though they were obviously both fiction. Not to say that Theater Camp was trying to make fun of theater. I think it was very much for theater people, but it felt like a movie. Taylor Swift The Eras Tour, a filmed version of Taylor Swift's record-breaking Eras Tour concert. I did go to Eras Tour, and it was really fun. And it was really fun to see the atmosphere at the Eras Tour concert as well. Everybody was still there's this camaraderie, this cultishness about it. Taylor Swift's team had a really interesting challenge in that the majority of the Eras Tour had been live streamed online by TikTok or YouTube or Instagram or whatever. You could find the stream online. You could watch it if you want to. So the question became, how do we film this in a way that's more valuable than what you can already get for free? A front row 4K iPhone recording. And I think they succeeded at that. I think it feels very immersive, which I think is the thing that they can do that an iPhone can't. Then I saw Maestro, which is a biography of the renowned composer Leonard Bernstein. The first half of this, 5 stars. It's really impressionistic. They're doing all these weird turns. They're kind of mixing musical and play, and there are these weird like scene changes, and they're hopping around all over the place. It's really, really, really cool. And then the second half of it is just more of a normal biopic to me. Still an incredible time. There's still some really, really powerful scenes in the second half. I do not want to discount the second half. I just wish that the second half was as playful with the storytelling as the first half. Some great music in this, and Bradley Cooper and Michelle Williams give incredible performances. And then we kind of start moving to spooky movies. So Totally Killer, after a serial killer from the 80s returns in 2023, Jamie goes back in time and teams up with her mother to take down the murderer. The premise is fun. The premise is camp. This seemed like a super good time. It's just like all over the place tonally. It was written by too many people. It went through too many focus groups. It's up and down and up and down. It's not very cohesive. And ends up not being fun, surprisingly. The Craft. I'd never seen this before. The new girl at school falls in with a group of goths who practice witchcraft, and they end up getting in over their heads. I figure most people had seen this movie, but I never have. I thought it was really fun. It was not at all. I thought it was a John Hughes movie, first of all. But it ended up being darker than I thought it would be, and ended in places which I didn't expect. I liked how they allowed themselves not to be neat and tidy with it. It didn't knock my socks off, but it was way better than what was in my head. Then I saw Killers of the Flower Moon. In 1920s Oklahoma, the Osage Nation becomes rich from the oil discovered on their land, but opportunists swoop in to try and marry into the riches and exploit the tribe. I like Scorsese's film history version of himself more than I do the movies that he actually makes, but this might be my favorite of his movies. All the characters are extremely complex. It's more of a mood piece about what it felt like to live in the Osage community in the 20s. It's this like mood piece about like a setting disguised as a crime thriller. Really great performances. I'm looking into Lily Gladstone now because I really thought that she was just such a powerhouse. Leo DiCaprio played a dumb guy really, really well. Some of the closing scenes in this are just like your stomach drops. It's really interesting and playful. Playful isn't the right word, maybe experimental. It was less interested in entertainment than it was tone setting, and I thought that was really cool. People are coming home. I'm going to have to reset. All right, that's better. The next movie is Blackcoat's Daughter. It's 2 young girls at a prep school, stay there over the winter. One sneaks out to see boys, and the other one is stalked by a dark entity. This is an A24 horror, if that gives you an idea of the type of movie this is. I feel that it tried to be poetic but wasn't very good at it. There were some truly harrowing moments or scenes or images in this, but as a narrative it doesn't keep your interest, and as poetry it's not engaging enough to feel meaningful. The Criterion Channel had a block of pre-code horror movies, and I watched a couple of those. First was The Black Cat. While vacationing in Hungary, a couple gets in a car wreck and is forced to take refuge in this weird house with this eccentric doctor and this reclusive architect who built the place. And it turns out there's some dark secrets being held between the doctor and the architect. This movie was so impressive to me with how subtextual everything is. I know the thing with these pre-code movies is they're supposed to be like these kind of, they're talking about adult things when you had to kind of dance around it. But I don't mean from like a content standpoint as far as like sex or blood or anything like that. I mean the characters' histories and their relationships and where we are and what's going on. It really tells so much in the in-betweens. World building is one of my favorite things that happens in any media, and this was such a powerful piece of world building. And also just incredible over-the-top performances, an incredible set design. There's a scene at the end which kind of breaks with a more traditional and is kind of like feels almost 70s. It's like, whoa, like this movie's got it all. Definitely one of my favorite horror movies, just like period now. The next pre-code one I watched was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. A very respected doctor has a theory that everyone is made up of two parts, a good part and an evil part. To prove this, he starts experimenting on himself, and the two halves begin living separate lives. First of all, the performance of the guy who's playing Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, so good. Also, this is maybe one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. The practical effects are interesting, but that's not the scary part. It's not crazy supernatural. It's just so effective with tone and tragedy. Basically, in this interpretation of it, Dr. Jekyll has a fiance, and then when he becomes Mr. Hyde, he kind of imprisons this sex worker, forces him to be her live-in girlfriend, and basically is an abusive partner to her. And it's not this brutal rip people apart thing. It's this fear that feels so much more real, both on the side of the person who's being oppressed and then the person who has gone too far and doesn't want to be there. We know that Dr. Jekyll's in there somewhere, but we know that Mr. Hyde is the one that's calling the shots, and it's scary. You don't know what he's going to do, and you don't trust him, and he's terrifying. He's terrifying. But I just found this such a powerful movie. Watching this like the day after Black Cat, I was like, holy crap, like these are, oh my God, you know? Both of these, hard to recommend. So good. And definitely some of my favorite horror movies, just period now. Next up is the classic My Dinner with Andre. I knew that this movie was just two people talking. That's pretty much all I knew about it. So I was going in expecting to enjoy it more intellectually than emotionally or on a visceral kind of level, like a moment to moment. But it turns out that like this is just storytelling at its barest bones and in an incredible way. This is just such a showcase for the two performers and their ability to monologue. The camera will slightly move, but you are really being arrested just by storytelling. And my eyes were glued to the screen. I wasn't bored. And I didn't just say like, oh, okay, this is like interesting intellectually. I was like, what are they saying? Like, where's the story that he's telling going about his trip in Africa or whatever? Or when he got stuck in the woods, like the oldest form of storytelling, which is just oral, you know? And it was interesting to see that try to be approached with the video element, just so stripped back. And the movie that I watched Halloween night was The Innocents. A new governess signs on to take care of two kids who had a governess that died. And when she gets there, she starts to suspect that they are possessed. Beautiful cinematography in this, and really sets up an eerie tone. One of the goals of this movie was to translate kind of Gothic literature into the visual, the kind of floweriness of it and things. It was really aligned with what I was reading, because I was reading a lot of like Gothic books from this era. Turns out one of the books in my Gothic list, The Turn of the Screw, is what this was based on anyways. Now, I haven't read that one yet, or I am currently reading it. The look of the film really did translate that vibe, that feel. It felt kind of, if you like movies like Crimson Peak or like The Others, this movie, you need to see this. It's very atmospheric. It's creepy. It's creepy because there's ghosts, but it's also creepy because she kind of starts to fall in love with one of the young kids who she thinks is possessed by an older man. There's a lot of weird layers to this movie. Great performances, really fun effects, really fun tone setting. And the perfect Halloween movie. And then just because I don't want to move, I've only got one video game that I played through this month. I've been playing it through the couple months, so I'll just stay here to do this. Armored Core 6, The Fires of Rubicon. It's a third-person mecha shooter which tells the story of a mercenary for hire, simply named 621, who goes to the planet Rubicon 3, which is currently being fought over by multiple corporations trying to get a monopoly over a drug-like material called coral. This is basically a third-person robot game where you do specific missions, and then the money you gain from that you use to build out cooler robots, and then you fight other robots. So one of the commentaries of this game is you're a mercenary and you are working for corporations and they hire you out. And often you'll do one job that helps one, and then the exact next mission is you're working for the other company. There's some interesting moral questions that get raised that you don't have the opportunity to answer. You're just kind of a mercenary for hire, so you're doing these things just because you're told, even if you think they're wrong. And then at a certain point in the game, you get the option to choose. One of the interesting, frustrating, but also cool things about the game is that you have to beat it 3 times to see all of the story that the game has to tell. At the end of the game, you have the choice to choose between one of the corporations or this kind of resistance front that represents the citizens of the planet. Depending on what you choose, you get completely different missions and a completely different ending. Whatever you choose in your first playthrough, you then have the option to play through the game again and make different choices. On the second run through, you start seeing other things that you hadn't seen before, different perspectives. You'll go on a mission from a different angle, things like that. And then on the third run through, from the very beginning, you'll get the opportunity to be on the side of the people from the planet, and you get to see more details about the underbelly of everything that's going on. Each subsequent playthrough enhances your previous playthrough, or at least the knowledge of the world. So much to say that many of the reviews that I've seen online say, I'm so sad that people only play this game once, because you don't really get the whole game until you play it 3 times. And the thing is, I do love the characters and I want to know about them more. That's my favorite part of the game. The problem is, I'm not a huge fan of the gameplay. I'm not a shooter guy in general, and this is a little bit different, but I think one of the big things is the difficulty spikes. In most games, you have small missions which lead up to a boss, which puts to the test all the skills that you were practicing on the smaller missions. Unfortunately, the way that Armored Core 6 takes it is the smaller missions don't have anything to do with the bosses. So you'll never die, and then you'll reach a boss who has stuff that you've never seen before, that your practice occurs in your fighting with the boss, and end up dying a ton of time spending hours on a boss. So it's not very rewarding in that way, outside of just you're practicing and then you beat them, but then those skills seem wasted because you can't use them in other levels. It's not a curve, it's a kind of a spike. Just the spikes get higher each time. But the easy level, the regular missions kind of stay like this. And then on your second playthrough, normally that's a victory lap in a lot of other Souls games. Everything's easy. And that's true in this one too. But so much to the point, it just feels like I'm just playing on through it to get to the third mission, to maybe hear some more dialogue or find a little bit more about the plot or whatever. I wish that the second run through was as different as the first is from the third. I will return to this game because I want to know about the characters, but I decided to put a pause on it for now, say I'm done with it, probably till the end of the year, just so I can have some time to play some other games that have gotten some hype this year. All in all, I enjoyed it. Not my favorite Souls game. I'm a big FromSoft guy, but I'm happy they made it. And the characters are still super strong. Well, you made it. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw here, you can follow us on Letterboxd, where I have some more in-depth reviews of the stuff that I went over, for movies at least. Or you can subscribe here on YouTube. I'll be back next week with another hyper-specific movie list. My name is Houston. This is Media Mood Board. Bye.